To recap the relevant information from our previous installments, we learned that the Quabbin Reservoir has an interesting and sometimes secretive history. After the disincorporated towns at the bottom of the Swift River Valley were demolished, and construction of the reservoir's dams and viaduct were completed, the grounds were used as a test range for bombers and precision munitions. Later, a radio telescope observatory would be erected there by a partnership of 5 local universities with some federal funding. The grounds of the telescope, and indeed much of the land around the reservoir, are off-limits. The observatory was painstakingly dismantled in 2011, with every trace of the facility being removed. We spoke with Professor Stair, who was the director of the observatory at the time of its dismantling, and he shared with us that the observatory had been left by the schools decades earlier for a better site in Mexico, and could not tell us who operated the observatory during that time. He told us the equipment therein had been modified for a purpose he could not guess, and that he found a cryptic note left behind. He shared the contents of that note, and when we reached out with more questions, we were unable to contact the professor for some weeks. We discovered that the mention of the Notch in the professor's note is likely a reference to a now decommissioned Air Force base in Hadley, Massachusetts, which is, coincidentally, listed as a library storage for the selfsame universities that built the observatory. The professor would later contact us and leave us with more questions, referring to a gate between Eisenach and Gotha, 2 mountains in Germany, and asking us to meet him at an address in Boston which no longer exists. Thank you for joining us for more Small Town Strange.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Small Town Strange. Our show is the place to hear New England-based stories of the weird and unusual. We like to focus on the often overlooked intersections of history and science. You can find our podcast on YouTube and Instagram, and soon Spotify. Joining us later in the show will be Ben Pullings, freelance reporter with the Boston Daily Advertiser.
Before we get to Ben, though, remember the discussions that we had with the professor last time?
Yeah.
Well, I've been puzzling at the note he referenced from the cleanup of the Quabbin telescope grounds.
Okay, what about?
To refresh the details, it said 8:15, transmission received, 7FR VK6, 24 hours apart. Possible response from Subcroft, ? Interval unknown, notify Notch.
Yeah, okay.
Well, codes and ciphers are a bit of a hobby of mine. And with what I've been reading about the telescope's research, I discovered that if I shift the numbers and characters in the transmission one place, alphanumerically, it matches the radio data from the WOW signal.
I don't know what the WOW signal is about.
All right. In the 70s, a radio telescope at Ohio State called the Big Ear, part of SETI, or the Search for Extraterrestrial Life, heard a signal different from anything ever heard before. It's on a narrow band that experts speculated would be perfect for far space communication. It lasts like 72 seconds, and it sounds, for lack of a better description, like a machine. To make things stranger, the telescope has these 2 horns to give it sort of auditory binocular vision. So anything heard by the first horn should be repeated in the second horn around 90 seconds later. The thing is, though, that second transmission never arrives. Some people think something really big may have occluded the source of the signal.
Like how big?
Like almost planet big.
Okay, so you mean, I don't know if you mean this, but last time when we talked about that planet Vulcan that the French guy theorized about in the, what was that, late 1900s, something like that, that would be big enough to block it?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. And Mercury would have been in the right position in the night sky that day. Maybe more interesting is that while the expected transmission was never received, we may have responded.
Okay, you got to say more about that. So who's we?
I guess we is the wrong word, but something on or within the Earth may be what Stair's message concerns. Remember how he described the telescope as having been inverted? Anyway, there was a major seismic event the day after the WOW signal was received. And while the date on Stayer's note lacks a year, we're talking 816 in both cases. The US government claimed the event was an underground nuclear test in the Nevada desert.
Sorry to interrupt. I think my work may dovetail a bit with yours.
Yeah, how so?
So he uncovered something that might be this response that you're talking about. He's been writing about an expedition that went to the Antarctic, and it seems that one of the scientists was looking for a signal as well.
Yes, I've really stumbled onto quite something this time. I've been covering the story of the Arctic Expedition for the Advertiser. There's this Clifton fellow, Silas Clifton, one of the scientists on the project. Anyway, the expedition gets back, and a buddy of mine at the Society.
The Boston Society of Natural History?
Yes, the sponsors. As I was saying, I'm having drinks with a buddy of mine at the Society, and he's telling me of the recently returned expedition. I'm jotting notes for my article, and he takes my pad. I ask him what gives, and he gets real quiet-like. He starts to tell me of a geologist that went missing and is presumed dead. I remind him that's old news and was in the paper weeks ago. He whispers that there's more to the story than what ran in the paper. Then he pushes what he says is his Clifton fellow's diary across the bar. He kept notes of the whole trip, full of crazy stuff. A lot of it's in some sort of code. I haven't sorted those bits out, but the stuff that wasn't encoded makes for quite a tale.
Back up, though. Before we get to the journal, what do you know about this Clifton guy?
Right, so, Silas Clifton grows up out west in a wealthy and progressive family. A smart kid, he's sent to study at the Roundhill School before going on to study geology and metaphysics at the University of Colorado. Does some work in mining before falling in with the Coruscant Unity down in Florida.
We talked a bit about them last show.
After falling in with the Coruscant, he looks for opportunities to scientifically prop up their assertions. Reading his journal, he feels there's an opportunity when a strange signal is picked up off a teleprinter in August.
Come again?
The signal originated from a ground conduction wireless transmission system, but the Society wasn't sure of the origin. Clifton was already booked to be the geologist for the Society's expedition and was staying at the Algonquin Club. He gets word from a Society colleague of an unusual teleprinter output. Reviewing it, it appears to be gibberish. He wrote in his diary, "My eyes pored over it again and again, trying to make some sense. I eventually noticed a pattern of repeating characters, but couldn't imagine what they were. What I did imagine was where they came from."
Just a second. In recent shows, we've been discussing the FCRAO telescope and how it may have been purposefully used to pick up transmissions coming from beneath the Earth's surface. Sounds like the printer you mentioned did something similar.
I'm not familiar with that, but it all sounds similar. Anyway, Clifton here wants to prove the Coruscant's hollow Earth theories and thinks this signal must be coming from people transmitting it from inside the Earth.
But how is this going on the expedition going to prove anything?
Silas Clifton wrote in his journal that he'd hoped to find the entrance to a hollow Earth in the Antarctic. After this bizarre signal was received, he hoped to make contact. This is what I think the coded bits have to do with. He didn't just want to prove his theories. If there's some sort of inner Earth folk, his business must have been with them and their message.
You said he went missing. Why do you think he left his journal?
I think leaving it was an accident. Asking other members of the expedition, they told me that Clifton headed out one day to get some core samples. Said he was double-checking some work he'd done the prior day and would be back shortly. I don't think he intended to disappear.
We're about out of time, but please come back when you're able to find out more. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Join us in 2 weeks when we dig deeper into Trouvelot's apprentice Micah Schmidt and his strange research notes left behind in the library at Harvard University.